Hi, I'm Doc B, and today we're going to give you a few tips on how to put together the wood bases that come in your Bottlehead kit. When you open your kit up, you're going to find a nice little bubble wrap pack, and that's going to have this little combination of parts in it, which is the 4 pieces for your wood base. When you grab these guys, first of all, you'll notice they're made out of a really nice Pacific Northwest alder. They've been made by the same millwright for us for about 20 years now, JR at Harmonic Designs Works. The way that they're made is they have a really precise 45-degree angle cut on the edge, and you'll also notice that they have a rabbet along the top edge. That's for setting your chassis panel into once they're assembled. So whenever you put these parts together, you want to make sure that you have the rabbet edge always on the same side. Don't flip things upside down. Double check that. When we originally conceived these, we decided to make them go together as easily as possible, kind of like a picture frame. And if you do that right, and the cuts are right on the pieces of wood, it should just all square up automatically for you when you pull it together. The easiest way to do that is take these pieces, watching that edge, the rabbeted edge, making sure it faces the same way on each piece. And you're going to alternate long and short pieces. So I have a short next to a long, next to a short, next to another long. We're going to line them all up on our work surface, get them nice and straight. And then what you want to do is take some painter's tape. I like the stuff that's about 1.5 inches wide. Inch will work, 2 inch will work. Doesn't really matter, not critical. Tear off a few inches, and once you really get a nice clean alignment of those 2 parts, tape it together so it won't wiggle around. Move across. The second one, tape it down. Third one, tape it down. And now you want to dry fit this before you put any glue in any joints. So we're going to take the whole assembly and carefully flip it up on its bottom edge, and then it should magically pull together into a nice rectangle. And you'll see that you have a pretty nice tight fit at all the miters. So now that you are sure that everything is going to go together just the way you want, we're going to carefully unbend that whole thing, and you're going to lay it down on the opposite face so that now your mitered edges are facing up. Okay, now that we have our pieces all lined up nicely, we've tested them all and made sure that they're going to square up, it's time to do some glue. So you're going to want to have some glue around. I've got Carpenter's wood glue by Elmer's. You can use Type Bond. Any kind of wood glue is going to be acceptable. I would probably stay away from the urethane things like Gorilla Glue because they're a little harder to deal with, and you don't really need that extra strength. They tend to expand and foam out, and you'll have a lot of extra glue junk sticking out of your joints that you don't want to have to mess with later. So just stick with the Carpenter glue. Keep a damp cloth around handy because you want to be able to catch any of the ooze out of the seams of the glue as you put it together. So we're going to lay some glue on each of these joints. And when you do this, don't be too heavy-handed. It will spread pretty well by itself and come together pretty nicely. So I usually just work towards the inner edge of the joint instead of going all the way out to the outer edge, and that will help keep the glue that squeezes out just squeezing out on the inside instead of the outside. I'll just get a nice light coat. Doesn't need to be a big gob running down. I usually use the tip of the glue bottle to kind of spread it out a little bit. You can spread it a little further with your finger if you want. That's just fine. Get it in there. Nice even coating. Each one of these guys. Get that glue off your hand before you pick anything up. You really want to try to keep the glue off the outside of the wood surface, because if the glue gets into the grain, it will be harder to get your finish to work well with it. Okay, now we're going to do just what we did with the dry fit. We're going to very carefully tip everything up and bend it back into shape. Make sure that it's all squaring up nicely, and then we're going to grab one last piece of tape for the corner that hasn't been taped. Make sure you get your edges to match up nicely and pull that around. Okay, we have our corner pulled together there, and now I'm going to watch and see. I notice there's a little tiny bit of glue that's oozing out of this seam over here, so I'm going to take my damp cloth, just wipe that off. Some folks will let these joints dry and then they'll come back after them with a X-Acto knife or whatever, and they can snap that off. I don't feel that I'm that adept at it, and I don't want to chip the wood, so I make sure that I address the issue while the glue's still wet, and I can just wipe it off with the cloth. Now, the last little trick that I suggest, just as kind of a belt and suspenders approach, because this should just square up nicely, is I'll take the chassis panel that comes with the kit at this point and just carefully drop it in there and make sure we've got a nice square fit. And as you see, perfect fit. So we're in good shape. We're going to let this dry now. I suggest overnight. If you're in a hurry, look at the instructions on the glue bottle. It may say a shorter time period. And we'll come back with a base that's dried, and we'll show the next steps we're going to try. Okay, we'll assume that you've waited overnight, probably, been smart, and your glue in your base has dried. You'll notice that the base I was working on just magically shrank a couple inches. That's because we're trying to step through the process here, so I had a base already done, ready to go. So, next step is we're going to peel the tape off. And while we're doing that, we're just going to kind of have a look, make sure that everything looks squared up. There will be minor variations. This is wood. That's just how wood is. That's part of the charm of wood. And there will be some minor variations in how those parts have matched up around the edges. And that is why they invented sandpaper. So, what we're going to do now is do a nice light sanding on this. It's obviously it's finished mostly there already, but we're going to just take it down real smooth. And you can do this preferably, and what I do is to use a palm sander, electric sander, but you can certainly do it by hand, and that's what I'm going to show you here. I've got just a real simple, inexpensive sanding block, 220 grit paper. That's really the sweet spot. You can try 150, it's going to leave it a little rough. You'll probably have to go with something finer. 220 will take you down enough to knock down the grain and make it feel real smooth to the touch, and it will take oil finishes and so on just fine. If you want to go a little finer, knock yourself out, you don't really need to. So where I start on these is I feel it, and sometimes at the miters there will be a very slight difference in the heights. So what I'll do is just start sanding along the top edge. Make sure you keep your block flat. You don't want to have it rock this way or that way, or you'll tend to put a little bit of an angle on that top edge. I'm also going to stop because I'm going to put on my mask. I would advise using a mask with any kind of wood dust. Okay, so I'm going to go around, paying attention to those edges, stopping to feel things as I go. Bring it out, match up this corner. I can see a little additional mismatch here. Just give it a little extra work. Don't add more pressure, just give it a few more swipes with the sandpaper. Keep checking with your fingers. They're much better tool for this than your eyes. Okay, we're done with that, so we'll go to the sides. Nice, long, even strokes. Give you the best even finish on this guy. Around the end. Keeping it pretty firm against the table. You don't want the wood rocking around while you're running the sandpaper over it. Whole goal is to keep all these surfaces as flat as you can. You may want to get fancier. You may want to do what they call breaking the edges. You can take the sander, run just along the edges, just put a slight round over on them. I happen to like them a little bit crisp and sharp. Some people don't. So that's it. Shouldn't take too much sanding. The wood's really pretty well finished when you get it. Then you want to just take a rag, wipe it down, give it a good look around the corners, make sure that they're all nice and straight, square, and you're ready for whatever kind of finish you want to put on. All right, now that we have our sanding finished on this guy, it's time to start thinking about how you want to finish it. You'll notice on our website that almost all of our projects have a clear finish on them. I like it. It's something we've stayed with. It's consistent for us in the showroom, but it's certainly not a requirement. You can certainly put any kind of stain you want on the altar. That's one of the nice things about it. Even though it's one of the softer hardwoods, it still takes the stain really nicely. There's different kinds of stain. You can try all sorts of things. The one thing I'd stay away from is probably the one-shot things that are a stain and a varnish. They never go on as nicely as putting on a stain and then putting on whatever clear finish you want at the end. In particular, one of the finishes I like is aniline dyes. They're a little trickier to work with in terms of the fact that you need protection, and you'll notice I've got my really sexy gloves on here. And I have some stuff, I'm not even going to show you the brand because I bought this bottle at a closeout in about 1996, so you won't find this brand anymore, I'm sure. This is a water-based aniline dye. There's also alcohol-based aniline dyes. Alcohol-based is a little nicer from the standpoint that the grain won't be raised as much at least, when you put the stain on the wood. But it dries really, really fast, and you can end up with streaks. With water-based, it may raise the grain a little bit, probably will. It's not a huge deal because we can give a light sand afterwards. And the other nice plus about it is that it will go on pretty smoothly. You have a little more time that you can work and get the stain in. I have just a medium brown walnut. You can use anything. We've used Black India ink on some of these, and anything in between. So I just get a little on a rag, and I usually start on the top edge. Just wipe it nice and evenly. Make sure you get good fill into the corners so that they're even, and it kind of soaks into the little corner seam. Will look a little nicer. I'm just going to run it around. Follow the grain. Don't try and rub across it. It's not going to work too well. You can see that as I wipe, it adds and builds. It gets a little darker. Go to the sides. Again, kind of like with the sanding, nice long even strokes usually give you the least streaky, smoothest finish. As you can see, that's bringing up the grain nicely and giving it some nice color. This is kind of a classic 60s walnut look, which is kind of hip. Try and have a little system to these things, kind of get a rhythm when you do them, instead of just rubbing in circles and blotching and slapping it on there. And you'll usually get a more even coat in the end. Okay, our last end. Okay, we've got a pretty even finish around the outside, over the top. Now we still have this little rabbited area, and I will admit that I forgot to bring a brush today. You could probably use a Q-tip I'm just going to try and craftily fold my rag here to keep things moving. And you do want to get a little bit of color into that edge because there is a little tiny bit of that exposed on some of the chassis plates. The chassis plates vary in thickness depending on the kit. Some of them are thicker because they have to support more weight. So there will be different amounts of that little edge, inside edge exposed in these. So you definitely want to get some color in there. Again, get yourself a little cheap little paintbrush at the dime store, as they used to say. I guess the dime store became the dollar store. And do one last wipe around there to even it up. And there you go. Now, as it dries, it'll lighten a bit, and you may find that you want to add some more. You certainly can put a couple coats on if you like. It's kind of by eye. Bear in mind that if you're putting an oil finish on, it's going to look a little darker than this when it's done. If you're using a water-based acrylic finish, it's not going to change too much darker. They definitely dry a lot lighter and don't pop the grain as much. We'll get into that a little bit more here as we move on to the finish. But that's a really nice, even way to do a finish is with the aniline dyes. Okay, I've gone back and picked up that original base that I glued together. It's set up pretty well now, and I've gone over and sanded it with a 220 grit, just like I showed you with that last base we did, and have a nice smooth finish. I've checked my corners to make sure that they're all nice and even and level. Take a little extra sanding time there. It's all got a nice smooth touch. I'm just going to take a rag. You can take a vacuum cleaner if you like. You can take a tack cloth, clean it up a little bit, and we'll be ready to apply a finish. And we're going to do, obviously, a clear finish here today. This one hasn't been stained. And again, that's because that's just what a pretty large fraction of our customers do. Now for finishes, you can do as exotic a finish you want. You could spray paint it. You can put on things over the stained finishes. You could do a varnish or a shellac or a lacquer, whatever those things you might want to tackle. The easiest approach to this is to put on an oil finish or some kind of a water-based spray finish. And the difference between those two is the water-based spray finish will not pop the grain on the wood very much. In other words, it'll look pretty close to this after it dries. Something like the Varathane finishes that are water-based will give you that kind of look if that's what you're looking for. The alder has a pretty nice grain. I like to have it pop out. You'll see it on some of the wood bases around me here. The oil does darken things a little bit, but it really brings the grain out nicely and gives it kind of an organic look. An awful lot of folks these days are liking very safe linseed-based oils. Tried and True is a real popular one of those that our senior tech Paul Berkland uses on custom builds. I just happen to have been amassing a lot of stuff around my lab for 20 years, and I happen to have some Waco Danish oil finish here, which is a little bit more caustic, shall we say, but it's really just fine to use as well. It's got a little bit more varnish in it instead of just linseed oil. So we're going to show you how this goes on. It's real darn simple. You just put some on a rag and wipe it on. Couldn't be easier. And as you're doing this, it turns out that the heat of friction when you rub helps even it out and work it into the wood. So you don't want to get rubbed so hard that you're wearing yourself out, but just a little pressure and maintain it. Just keep going over it a few times and you'll see it actually kind of work into the wood, and you'll see the wood darken its tone a little bit. As you're wiping, the grain will pop up a little bit more and a little bit more. Just work my way around. You'll notice with this stuff, I'm doing the sides before the top. it's not too critical. This, you can kind of be sloppy with this and it won't create any kind of problems with splotches or anything, but that's how I'm doing it. Get the 4 sides done. Okay, we got those done. Now tackle the top. Finish into that rabbet so that it looks consistent around the edges when I drop my chassis panel in. If you have a desire to finish the entire inside, knock yourself out. It's going to be hidden. I'm kind of an old lazy guy. I've been dealing with these kits for a long time, so I don't worry about that stuff too much, but you certainly can put the finish on the inside and the outside without it creating any problems in the rest of the build. Okay, so there's our first coat. What you'll want to do is go over it with either a nice light sandpaper. 220 was probably okay, and I certainly use it out of laziness because I have it lying around. You could go to a finer, to a 320 or a 400 grit, and as you add maybe 2 more coats, you can even finish with steel wool, maybe a 4/0, something like that. There's also Scotch-Brite that comes in real fine grades that you could try buffing on there as well. The finish is a little matte right now. As it builds, you'll get a nice satin sheen to it as it builds up. So I'll let you experiment with that. Do try more than a single coat. I think this usually looks its best at about 3 coats. So there you go. Okay, the last and possibly most important thing in this process is worded very clearly on the bottom of your instruction page for this. You must install the feet. It's really important that you put the rubber feet that are included with your kit onto the base. That's for ventilation. The components underneath the chassis get very warm, and you'll notice on some of the kits, particularly the amplifier kits, there's cooling vents in the chassis panel itself to let out heat from the chassis, but those can't work unless the wood base is raised up so that some air can come in underneath to rise out. So you've got to have these feet on the base. Your kit's not warranted without it. We'll scold you if you leave them off. So these guys just peel off, and you couldn't be simpler. You just take one, stick it on each corner, and that's it. No excuses. Couldn't be simpler. There's your base with feet on it. Voila. Don't forget the feet.